Welcome to ECI Pulse. It's a podcast where we're going to break down the latest trends shaping the business world. I'm Jeff Schmidt, CEO of ECI. We are the leading provider of cloud services, cybersecurity, and digital transformation solutions for the alternative investment firms worldwide. Alongside me today is my co-host, Jonathan Brucato, Director of Security Operations at ECI. Today, we're launching a new series, Cyber Frontlines, Securing the Future with ECI. In this series, we'll explore the future of cybersecurity across three fronts: the shift beyond traditional MFA toward phishing-resistant passkeys, the dual role of AI as both a threat and a defense tool in modern cybersecurity attacks, and the importance of cyber hygiene, compliance, and the strategic advantage of a unified MSP and MSSP services. From zero trust to AI-driven threat detection, we're going to unpack how ECI is helping clients stay secure and resilient in an increasingly complex digital world. Whether you're a security leader, tech strategist, or just interested in learning about the future of digital defense, I'd invite you to join us as we explore the tools, tactics, and insights that matter most. So with that, let's jump right in. So Jonathan, an exciting time to be in the world that we're in, right? We're on the fringe of AI. We have 5G entering in, which really rapidly moves things remote and objects moving all over the place. So business happens everywhere and anywhere. With that, the beyond passwords, MFA mandates, and the rise of passkeys. So you're kind enough to allow me to start using passkeys inside the environment. So I have a history, as you know, in the password authentication marketplace. So I'm a firm believer that passwords suck. Don't have a better way of saying it. By turning that on, you've made my life easier where I'm not truly passwordless, but the passkey is allowing me to have a passwordless experience. It works across all of my devices. So we have a press right now, and we've seen it in too many cases where MFA is not implemented or exceptions put in place where somebody is exposed because they're not utilizing MFA. So we know while it has its potential issues or maybe ways around it, the component of this is actually valuable in environments. And so from your perspective, when we talk about it across industries, limitations, and in the face of evolving threats, why is MFA so important?
The full stop conclusion we land on is that passwords inherently are not secure. So, passwords as a concept or a secret that you retain have been around for human centuries. In the digital age, they've evolved meaningfully, but I think that in general, conventional wisdom tells us that they are not a secure method of authentication. The combination of a username and password can be phished. It can be taken from a web browser in a cache credential. It can be, stolen 100 different ways. And over the last, couple of decades, we've started to implement this multi-factor authentication concept, which is we recognize that usernames and passwords are not secure. So let's add this second factor to add an additional dimension that's malleable, that's, sort of just in time, that's going to give us that authentication setting around, just the username and password. Um, I think what I've seen in our industry and what I've seen elsewhere, colleagues in the industry all complain about the same thing. We're all trying to figure out different ways to train the same information over and over again into our users, into our colleagues. Don't reuse passwords, try to use passphrases instead of complex passwords. We've seen the genesis of, use really complex, really long strings that you might be able to memorize to complexity doesn't necessarily matter. There's a whole debate about, complexity and the relationship a human has to remember that password. So ultimately, where it lands us is, we can keep needling at this idea that, we can find the best or perfect way to do passwords plus MFA. And while I completely agree that MFA is a must on top of the username and password experience, it's really nice to see that the industry is trending towards passwordless authentication, right? Which is interpreted by vendors differently across the board, but I think everybody's starting to swim in the same direction, which is really great to see.
How does that, if you look at FIDO, especially FIDO 2.0, right, which is really embracing a passwordless environment. Companies like Knock Knock Labs that were very early to the game, right? And you see financial institutions trying to figure this out as well, right? Um, it's speed, ease of use, and simplicity, right? And then you have to take the variations, right? Which is, you know, access to network, on a plane where you're traversing and moving rapidly fast, where we know sometimes MFA doesn't work as well, at the mercy of the airplane's carrier and provider, whether they allow you to use the right types of tool sets. So we also have to take into account, I'm assuming we should be taking into account how the business works and operates, alongside of the controls we're trying to put in. So there's a delicate balance of workflow automation, ensuring that you're enabling the business versus just protecting the business.
Yeah, like the FIDO Alliance, I think, has done a great job at, spreading the options out a little bit. You know, I think early on in this experience, we saw some folks try to use hardware tokens, which might have been solving for a little bit of the I'm in a limited network connection space. Um, I find that those can be a little bit tricky because you're going to end up having to buy, multiple, um, pieces of technology for people in case they lose them. I certainly think that they have a place, especially when you get to, military or government organizations. But for the layperson, it's perfectly accessible to use something like a password manager with passkeys stored inside of it to be able to log into your many different cloud accounts, even when you're traveling. It's not that it's going to be, a high bandwidth or a highly available activity that requires, difficulty with your technology, right? Um, you and I are using passkeys today in a way that allows us to authenticate to our accounts with some near field Bluetooth compatibility between our, mobile devices, for example, and our mobile laptops, right? I think the ease of use and accessibility, translates well to that on the go experience, right? It's going to be something where you don't necessarily have to think, but it's incredibly phishing resistant in that what we're doing is essentially using a key pair, right? It's still cryptography at the end of the day. That's going to be, authenticating, Jeff gets to go here. And that key pair is very specifically used for that particular service. It's not something that's, in the wild discovered to be exfiltrated out of that experience. So we find it to be really comfortable. You don't have to think about it. It allows us to be a little less stringent on potentially even rotating passwords. I think the direction we're heading in is, fewer password rotations is more good, right? Um,
Yeah.
if we don't have to rotate until there's an indication of a compromise or an exposure of those credentials, that means that you don't really have to have the strain of thinking about, making a new complex password, making something that's, going to comply nicely with our block list. Um, it's overwhelmingly um, uh, frictionless, if you will.
Interesting. So taking that a step further, right? And so when we talk about passkeys, and in my past life of in the authentication arena, right? One of the things was how do you make it phishing proof or maybe tamper resistant? And so we found that the one thing most people wouldn't give away is a phone to somebody to go play with, right? Um, so how does a passkey then in the world that we live in today, if you think about it, is it what's the resistant level? Why is it more resistant than just multi-factor authentication? And I'll call it relatively strong password because every time you change your password, like you have to go through memorizing what it is. So it's amazing if you just went in and used you just used a password strength tool and looked at how good you think your passwords are. Typically it's 1 hour, 2 hours. Most people get up to maybe 1 day, right? But to your point is when you start adding and stacking things on, the way we used to explain it, and even in layman's terms, is this difference between a combination lock that has one rotating set of numbers to two, to 3 to 4. So layering your authentication mechanisms makes it harder, not necessarily impossible. I think Bruce Schneider used to always say security is like a fire safe, right? It's fire ratings, right? It isn't that, and it's time to break into the vault itself. It isn't a matter that you can't break into it. It's relative to time, to a time period and exposure level that you can reduce the amount of time that somebody's allowed to be inside without it becoming really apparent that somebody's tried to take over an account versus minutes to hours. So like why does it gain traction? Where's the significance in this from a standpoint of becoming more tamper proof and knowing who's on the other side? You are you in the situation we're talking about.
Yeah, like so to go to where we were a couple of years ago, username, password plus MFA is sort of that concept of like something plus something you have. So like an MFA token, an OTP token, whatever particular software you're using to run that, Microsoft Authenticator, for example, is going to be that something you have, and something is going to be your credentials, right? When you start talking about passwordless, and specifically this doesn't limit to passkeys, but for the sake of conversation, we'll riff on that. The passkey is a concept of building a key pair relationship with a service from that particular asset where you're storing the passkey, right? So, that passkey I might make with Microsoft Cloud or Google is really a unique relationship where I have the passkey. I'll use a password keeper, a password manager to store passkeys. Microsoft recently started making passkey support available in Microsoft Authenticator. So you can use Microsoft products with Microsoft products to do this experience. But generally speaking, storing a passkey in a location is like, this is the location, this is where it lives, this is where it dies. I'm not picking it up and putting it down somewhere else. I'm not capturing it, across a network and then able to, activate it elsewhere. It sort of lives and dies with the location that it's created. And with the nature of the asymmetric key pair, and then the relationship with the service is storing an element of this passkey is valid for this particular service on that side. So it's really two sides need to have a unique set of information to be able to authenticate, um, which is actually technically both factors, right? It's something you have and something you know. Um, so it's able to satiate a multi-factor experience.
It actually throws in, I think, the third factor too, which is something you are, which is connected to the mobile device, right? So you get 3, and you're also getting location off of the mobile device, hopefully in proximity to whatever you're trying to log into. So like your vectors start to expand, the better that you can put the modeling into your threat management tools, similar to the product sets that you support at ECI. Can you explain asymmetrical just in layman's terms, what you mean by that? Um, Two, just one other piece on that, which was, um, if I use a Microsoft passkey, can I use it in Google and other places, or do I have passkeys all over the place, or is it a one to many inside that scenario?
For in layman's terms, asymmetry is just going to be, a piece of private information and a piece of public information, that are used in conjunction with one another to make an exchange, right? If you and I are exchanging information, we're doing so through an agreed set of parameters in the realm of cryptography,
Okay,
to say like, I'm going to present to you as myself, using a unique private identity that only I know about. Um,
gotcha.
Obviously, cryptography can be really, really tricky for the layperson, even the technologist. I find that it's a class all in its own. But on the notion of passkeys, so passkeys are really going to be a one-to-one relationship. It's not a skeleton key to the city, right? So um, the FIDO Alliance, again, we've talked about this a couple of times. There's a litany of different vendors out there that are starting to contribute to this idea of let's move towards passwordless. Something that is actually producing some turbulence, in my opinion, is the nature of which the nature in which different vendors are deciding to enter the passwordless journey. or the passkey journey specifically. Some vendors might use a passkey as a second factor, saying you're going to still enter your credentials, but you can use a passkey instead of MFA. Some folks, the bigger vendors like Google, Microsoft, are going to allow your passkey to be your first and second factor. You can make your way right in, but each of those passkeys is going to be a unique cryptographic pair for that service. So the key lives and dies with the service. I assume I have dozens at this point in my password manager personally for personal use across the internet. But as it pertains to Microsoft, like I said, they've just started to release into GA and kind of announce like a full throttle assault on use of passwords in general. Come the fall, new Microsoft tenants are going to be default enabled with a passwordless solution. So we're heading in that direction. Existing customers can start making the shift. Our customers can start talking to our account teams on how to make that shift.
Yeah, I think that's really important. In the general availability components of this, right? So it's ready for prime time. And so what about recovery? So a lot of people might say, well, what happens if I lose my mobile device? Or because that's where the authenticator or something within that is going to be my secondary use. How do I recover that? Do I have to go get another phone? Like, how do I get to a point where I can start operating again? Or if I have my computer, can I revert back to old standards and still get into my systems and operate temporarily until I get a replacement device, or if somebody's nice enough to return it? Because I think that probably it happens more now today than I think it did in the past. Before, people would take your phone and never give it back. Now they're looking for peripherals. They want your headphones and your really cool mouse, but not necessarily your laptop or your phone.
Right, right. Yeah, it's a great question. In terms of in the realm of specifically passkeys, I think it's about doing a bit of a rebuild, right? Regenerating a passkey, uh, killing the old passkey that might have been lost with that particular asset. I think traditionally, we see administrators, following practice of, if you lose your phone, like out of abundance of caution, let's rotate your password anyway. Let's assume that, that device has, meaningful information on it, and should it be cracked, then we want to make sure that, it's not, like overly permitted, or that there's not something that might have been saved inadvertently on that particular system. Similarly, if you have to sign into an account again for the first time, where you're getting into enrolling in your MDM again and things like that, there's going to be some motions that are going to feel similar. Regenerating a passkey. Some types of passkey management might include recovery. Theoretically, a password manager or something of that kind might be able to, um, you know, account for, I've lost this device, but I'm signing back into this password manager. I think from memory, even Microsoft Authenticator has some backup elements to it as well, where that can be recovered with additional factors. So it really depends on the experience. Like I mentioned, it's, to the discretion of the third party that's supporting passwordless and passkeys to decide, sort of what that experience becomes.
Got it. That's helpful. And I think it helps people to understand what they're going into, the complexity, right? And again, early to the game, I remember people used to always ask me, "Is like, what happens if I lose my phone?" And recovery, the simplicity of recovery makes it way easier. There was always you can always go back and type your password in where you were, because we weren't entering into the framework of passkeys. I think we'll continue to see that evolve as we're going forward. So that's helpful, I think. All right. So real world vulnerabilities, right? Um, there's one that I had noted down: pass the cookie, right? Sounds like maybe something on Sesame Street. Attacks that bypass MFA, right? And we do hear about those, right? We hear man in the middle attacks. The simplicity of somebody getting a phone call and asking somebody, "Hey, I'm from such and such, and I just asked for your PIN code." And a lot of times people ask us, "Well, how do they know to ask for the PIN code?" Well, they know your email, and maybe they know your password because it's on the dark web. Now the only thing they need to do, and they have your phone number, so they're going to enter it in, and they're going to ask for the MFA to go out, and then they'll just call you on the phone and be like, "I'm from Charles Schwab, and we just sent you a passcode. We're working on your account. Can you please give that to me?" and people can be fooled by that pretty easily inside those scenarios. It's not the fault of the primary care provider in this case. It's somebody circumventing from something that exists in the dark web. And a lot of times people are shooting from the hip trying to figure out usernames, passwords, and getting there. But it doesn't take long, especially with AI tools, the good and bad. And I think we'll talk about that in our next one, which is how AI actually enables rapid fire at things without having to have humans typing on a keyboard. But maybe give a little more about that. And there was another one that I think popped up as well, which was Microsoft 365 and YouTube as well. So if you have any insight to that, that'd be great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, let's go back to the prompt, passwords aren't secure, right? So we wrap MFA around it, and sure as day, like the threat landscape tends to move in, okay, well, how can we attack MFA? In some extreme examples, we've seen cases where, SIM swapping attacks can happen where, you might use a text message or a phone call as your second factor, which I would recommend, avoiding. Microsoft talks about this realm of phishing-resistant MFA, which is going to be, a combination of having an asset that you can enter a code into, or, a couple of other variables. But the SMS MFA is extremely beatable in that a threat actor can contact your, mobile provider and impersonate you, and with some information that's readily available on the dark web, get through all of your security questions, read back your social security number, and essentially grab your phone number on a different mobile device, lock you out of your um, mobile number, and get in with that second factor. Um, I would say like that's probably going to be an extreme method. That would be sort of like a whole account takeover where the threat actor is clearly known because something is very amiss once that phone number has changed hands. Other things like cookie hijacking or session token hijacking, where the second factor's already been approved and that session's been allowed for a period of time. It can be extracted to be moved into a different asset. Those things are certainly more prevalent. There's also
Can you explain
um,
that just a little bit more on that session hijacking and just a simple kind of 1, 2, 3 version of sounds like I enter my username, I enter my password, and I get my token, and there's for lack of better terms, there's a man in the middle who then takes over the session that I'm in and is able now to imitate me online or into whatever I'm trying to get into at that point.
yeah, depending on the approach or the attack, the kill chain is effectively the same, right? I am sitting and waiting for a successful session to be established with this particular service, and I'm going to take that session data that's been established for a period of time, and move it somewhere else to be able to continue working as if I've already authenticated into that system, right? It could be Microsoft Cloud, it could be Google, what have you. Um, whether that's somebody in real time grabbing that data, or grabbing that data through an additional, style of malware transfer. It could be ultimately like the key outcomes are the same, right? So
I leave. I
grabbing an
don't,
authenticated session, moving it somewhere else.
or I don't log out of my session. I leave the session active, and somebody's able to come in and take over the session. Is that a possibility as well?
Absolutely. I mean, this is where we get into things like compensating controls. So as administrators, we have to be mindful of, nullifying those sessions after a period of time, right? It's always best to, if it can be done so without friction, authenticate more frequently, right? So another form of passwordless for the Microsoft shops is Windows Hello. So Windows Hello is again doing a relationship, like a key pair relationship with your Microsoft Cloud, where that device has authenticity to it. We can frequently re-authenticate against that. We can trust the device itself, which is an authentication form that doesn't get to be picked up and put down somewhere else. It's a form of key pair relationship that lives and dies with that hardware, right?
Does
Um,
does this also solve, so I have multiple computers. Does this help solve the problem of I have a computer locked up, as I said, locked up at at another place, like maybe my office in San Francisco, that sits there and it's locked up. But when I go there, 30 days ago, I changed my password in New York. Does this help solve the problem the next time I go into that computer, that I'm not having to worry about my old password, my new password, and if the domain's been updated, et cetera? Does that help solve the problem as well?
I would say it's opening the front door in which we need to walk through, right? So what I mean by that is, we still now we have this easier solution that uh, makes us more likely to rotate passwords less frequently. So in the example of, I haven't been to this place for a while, why did we have to rotate that password in the first place? It's probably because a regulator or an auditor said, hey, you need to rotate passwords at X frequency. One of the provocative things is the technology is always going to move faster than the regulations. And even, within our federal government, there are disparate opinions on, rotate this, complexity that. But I think with passwordless authentication, we have the luxury of starting to decide, like, okay, do we need to be rotating these passwords so frequently? If we're not using them at all, they're sort of a means to an end, yes. But I think that as we continue down this road, the frequency of rotation is going to reduce or going to essentially disappear altogether. I think we're on the precipice of that change. But yeah, I completely agree that this change is sort of like the start of the catalyst to, eliminating some of those friction situations.
Yeah, there's a lot of security icons in the industry that are anti-changing passwords if you have the right credentials, unless your account has been compromised for any specific reason. So it's an interesting standpoint. Um, so ending this session, a lot of good data points, Jonathan, and very helpful. From an ECI perspective, and what I would invite our listeners to look at if they want to know more, at ECI.com, you can look at the insights from cyber. There's a white paper, which is the values of passkeys, embracing passwords and embracing passwordless protection. We also have more data and information about how we're helping clients implement the passkey based authentication, reduce the reliance on vulnerability that exists today. These are conversations in a lot of cases, and really sitting down and walking through the use cases, how people work, and in a lot of cases, just putting it in place like you did for me, starting to work it into the organization slowly and see where potential hangups are, roadblocks are with the use cases that come forward. And over a period of time, the industry tends to adopt, because I do know when I'm using it, the first question I ask is, how did you just log in? Right? How do I get that? That seems really easy. And I would assume I'm probably one of the more difficult clients within ECI's structure because of the movement where I'm at, the duplicity of things that I have within the environment. So and I actually enjoy being, maybe it's probably not a good thing to say, but being the problem child, because if I'm experiencing it, then there's a good chance our clients are going to experience it as well. Um, and I do mine across platform as well. So it can be Apple, it can be Microsoft, um, can be Unix based. I mean, it can be anything that I happen to be on at that point in time. So I do try and push the boundaries as we're going forward. Um, Anything in closing, Jonathan, that are good points just for our listeners to remember?
Yeah, I think for sure, we can be, strongly encouraging about, moving towards a passwordless direction, embracing things like passkeys. Of course, these are incredibly personalized situations. Not every client runs the same tech stack. Not every, family member is going to be willing to, install a password manager and do this, that, and the other thing. It is a journey. It's not a toggle switch, right? We have to be mindful and give ourselves some grace on, change is still change, right? But the entire idea here is that, it's about reducing friction while increasing security. And very rarely in security, from my lens, do you get more secure without reducing functionality or without creating some rub, right? Like this is less rub, more secure. And that's incredibly powerful.
It's awesome. Thank you for wrapping that up. So I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today. Jonathan, thank you for being here to spearhead the conversation and getting us thinking a little bit differently about how we interact and work on a daily basis. And what I believe is not only cool technology, but it's hugely enabling for us as an industry and as individuals and how we work. So thank you. See you next
Thanks.
time.